My name is Alice, and I'm a 48-year-old housewife. I live with my husband's family in their ancestral home. We have a daughter who is currently in her 4th year of university. She chose to live in a strict dormitory far from home to lessen the burden on us, which I admire. Our household includes my 74-year-old mother-in-law, my husband, me, and my 53-year-old sister-in-law, who is unmarried. My mother-in-law often questions what I do all day since I'm not formally employed, which can be quite disheartening. Despite her age, she doesn't hold back on her sharp comments. And sometimes, I wonder if her becoming meaner over the years is just a part of aging. From my experience, older people can be incredibly kind or quite harsh, with little middle ground, which might be shaping my view of her behavior. My sister-in-law also lives with us. She's older than me and works part-time, choosing not to marry and instead live rent-free at home while spending her earnings on herself. Though she contributes occasionally to household expenses, it's a minimal amount. Her work history includes a stint at a small company right after high school, but she left under problematic circumstances and has since preferred the flexibility of part-time work. What makes living together challenging is not just the financial aspects, but also the interpersonal relationships. My sister-in-law often looks down on me for being a housewife, considering it a lowly position. She makes snide remarks about my day-to-day activities and questions my capability, suggesting I am not doing enough or implying that I'm at the bottom of society. These comments are hurtful, but I try not to let them affect me. I know she has her struggles too, having had to quit her full-time job under difficult circumstances. Navigating this household's dynamics can be tough, but I focus on maintaining peace and supporting my family as best as I can. Despite her own problematic history at work, my sister-in-law had the nerve to criticize me. She accused me of quitting my previous job due to issues, which isn't true. I defended myself, making it clear that I wasn't the problem. Unlike her, I've never caused harm or acted with malice. During our conversation, she tried to justify her actions by saying she only gave advice to a colleague who then felt overwhelmed and portrayed her as the villain. From what I know of her, she likely did come across as too forceful, and I ended up feeling sorry for her colleague. It's probably for the best that she's no longer in that environment, considering how difficult she can be. Living with her has been quite challenging, and honestly, I dislike not just my sister-in-law but also my mother-in-law and even my husband at times. I've thought about divorce more than once, but have hesitated because of my age and the complexity of our family situation. They all seem to have difficult personalities, making everyday interactions draining. One night highlighted the tense atmosphere. My mother-in-law noticed a light on in my room late at night and peered in to ask what I was doing. When I told her I was working, she skeptically remarked that it didn't seem like I could accomplish much from home, although she added a half-hearted encouragement to do my best. I work from home, and because I'm busy with household chores during the day, I often find myself working late into the night. The quiet of the night aids my concentration, and I know I'm not alone in this nocturnal habit. Many famous writers also prefer the night for their creative processes. Amid these challenging family dynamics, a serious issue arose. My mother-in-law had mismanaged her finances to the point of nearing bankruptcy. When she revealed that she was $160,000 in debt, panic set in. She was overwhelmed by the amount and feared bankruptcy. The idea of declaring bankruptcy seemed almost a relief compared to the financial abyss she was facing. Yet, in her desperation, she implied that I could help pay off her debt, suggesting that my earnings should cover it. This assumption placed an even greater strain on our already fraught relationship. Back when I was younger, I worked hard and built a career that was quite impressive. I earned a salary of $60,000 at a major company, which was more than many men made at the time. Now, years later, my mother-in-law, facing a financial crisis, remembered my old earnings and saw me as a potential solution to her problems. She pointed out my previous salary and expressed her expectation that I would help. Reluctantly, I agreed to pay off her debt, but I set a condition to balance the responsibilities at home. I proposed that if I took care of the debt, she should take over some household chores. I would handle the heavier tasks, but she could manage the dishes and lighter cleaning. This arrangement would allow me to focus on my work during the day, even if it meant working with headphones on to block out distractions. My mother-in-law agreed to this deal quickly, and so I took on the burden of repaying her $160,000 debt. After all that effort, my daughter noticed my fatigue and asked if I was okay. I assured her I was fine, but my mother-in-law started complaining to her about being overworked. She told my daughter that since I was paying off her debt, I was making her do too much housework, essentially treating her like a slave due to her age. My daughter confronted me, upset about how I was supposedly treating her grandmother. She accused me of abusing my mother-in-law by burdening her with chores. I tried to explain that I only asked her to do manageable tasks and not the heavy lifting she was claiming. But then, my mother-in-law exaggerated, saying I was making her carry heavy laundry and buy lots of groceries, things I had never asked of her. The situation escalated when she accused me of taking advantage of her situation to strike a harsh deal, claiming that I was not actually productive or earning money, just pretending to work. She called me just a housewife, or worse, a slave, diminishing all my contributions and efforts. The accusations hurt deeply. I never intended for my attempt to manage our financial crisis to lead to such conflict, or to be seen as taking advantage of my mother-in-law's age. It was a painful misunderstanding, and I felt very misunderstood and saddened by the turn of events. I never demanded excessive labor from my mother-in-law. However, she seemed to deliberately play up her frailty. She would struggle visibly with heavy items, giving the impression that I was overworking her. Witnessing this, my sister-in-law misunderstood the situation and thought I was imposing too much on her. It dawned on me that my mother-in-law was manipulating the narrative to make herself look like a victim. I tried to discuss this with my husband, but he remained silent and uninvolved. Disappointed by his lack of support, I felt increasingly isolated within my own family. My daughter, who lives far away, was more understanding. When I confided in her about considering a divorce, she encouraged me to proceed swiftly. Strengthened by her support, I decided to file for divorce and began preparing for a new beginning. As the moving day approached, I packed my belongings, planning to take only what was mine. Everything I had bought with my own money, from furniture to home appliances, I loaded into the moving van. This included cherished items like the furniture I had purchased when I was single and the appliances I had invested in over the years. This prompted a big commotion among my in-laws. They protested as I prepared to take the vacuum cleaner and microwave items I had paid for and primarily used. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law seemed to think these items belonged to the family simply because they were used in the home. Similarly, my husband objected when I started packing the bookshelf that I had bought, which he had filled with his books. I cleared it out and added it to the van. By the time I was done, the house was nearly empty except for a few pieces of furniture like the dining table, living room sofa, and the beds. Even the dressers used by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were ones I had purchased, which I decided to take and possibly sell at a recycling shop, hoping to recover some money. Just as I thought the upheaval was at its peak, the police arrived. The sudden appearance of law enforcement shocked my mother-in-law and the rest of the family. They hadn't anticipated any legal issues arising from my departure. As tensions escalated, I reassured them that I had done nothing illegal, unlike some others. This veiled reference to illegal activities confused my mother-in-law momentarily until she realized I was alluding to her involvement in a pyramid scheme, which was the real reason behind her financial ruin. She had been recruiting friends and acquaintances into this scheme, leading her into deep debt and now, unexpectedly, to legal scrutiny. I'd always been curious about the abundance of cardboard boxes scattered throughout our house, but it wasn't until I opened them that I discovered they were filled with a variety of items, all of dubious value. There were teas and supplements whose health benefits were questionable, along with pots and pans. Among these, the most lavish purchases were crystal balls and bracelets, which, according to the sales pitches, were supposed to bring good fortune. My mother-in-law had been taken in by these claims, spending endlessly on these products from an organization she believed in. Despite the promises, these items only succeeded in driving her deeper into debt, contributing to the shocking total of $160,000. The situation escalated when it became clear that she had been using aggressive tactics to involve others in buying these products, which I learned when I discovered evidence of forced recruitment, including recordings and videos of her activities. Despite her protests and cries that she was just an old lady being unfairly targeted, the police were unmoved. They insisted that age doesn't exempt anyone from the consequences of criminal actions. As a result, my mother-in-law was arrested and taken away right in front of us, despite our family's pleas. After she was taken into custody, I left and drove to what would be my new home. It was a modest space, perfectly sufficient for one person. I knew my daughter would only visit occasionally, so a large place wasn't necessary. This marked the beginning of my new life, a fresh start that was both liberating and daunting. Yet, the financial loss weighed heavily on me. I had given my mother-in-law $160,000 to help her out of her financial mess, and now, with her having been fined less than $5,000 for fraud and unable to even pay that, she was under considerable stress. I knew she must be feeling overwhelmed, but I needed to reclaim that money. Neither her daughter nor my ex-husband showed any willingness to help her with the fine, and it appeared she'd even sold the house under the pressure of her financial obligations. Despite my reluctance, I realized I had to confront her once more. I was determined to get back the money I had unwillingly handed over, feeling deceived and taken advantage of. So, I decided to visit her again, this time at a relative's house where she had taken refuge. I was prepared to demand the return of my $160,000, the money I had never been happy to part with in the first place. When I found out that my mother-in-law had moved in with relatives who were taking care of her, I decided to visit. I needed to address the financial issues stemming from her actions that had impacted me directly. Upon arriving, I confronted her straightforwardly. "You sold the house, right? So, you must still have some money from the sale?" Caught off guard, she hesitantly admitted, "Well, yes, I do have some money." I pressed further. "How much? Please, be honest." She revealed the land and the house together fetched $160,000. It was a prime location, so despite its age, it sold for a good price. Hearing this, I firmly stated, "Then I'll need you to return the $160,000 that I paid to help you out of your previous debt." Her response was one of surprise and reluctance. "What? That's impossible. I was saving that money for a new apartment." Unmoved by her plans, I questioned her integrity. "You're planning to buy a new apartment? How can you consider such a thing while you're still caught up in wrongful deeds?" Confused, she asked, "What wrongful deeds?" I brought up another sensitive issue. "Aren't you involved with Mr. Thomas from our neighborhood? I've heard rumors." She stuttered. "Wait a minute." I continued, aware of her vulnerability since her husband had died when she was 60, leaving her widowed and perhaps lonely. But her actions, especially with a married man, were questionable. "Mr. Thomas is 73 years old. It seems both of you are quite lively." To press my point, I revealed I have a video here as proof. "Would you like to watch it?" Without waiting for her approval, I began playing the video on my phone. It showed my mother-in-law and Mr. Thomas engaged in inappropriate and indiscreet activities in broad daylight, where anyone could see them. I stated, "It's embarrassing to see someone over 74 behaving without any discretion. If you return the $160,000, I'll keep quiet about this to Mrs. Thomas." "What will you do?" Considering the potential cost of compensation if this gets out, it might be cheaper than returning the full $160,000 you owe me. Realizing the leverage I had, I placed several photos in front of her photos I had printed earlier from my phone. "So even with these photos, what will you say now?" Let's say hypothetically, compensation costs $9,000 per person affected. For 12 people, that's $90,000. For 22, it's $160,000. And you've been involved with 30 men, haven't you? She was visibly shaken by my words. I finished with a pointed remark. "You've been quite energetic, despite acting so frail in front of me." This confrontation was a pivotal moment, laying bare the complexities and hidden transgressions within our strained family relations. My mother-in-law turned out to be quite the character, a real femme fatale. Incredibly, she wasn't just seeing Mr. Thomas, She had connections with almost every man in the neighborhood, and all of them were married men still living with their spouses. It boggled my mind how she could manage to maintain relationships with 33 different people. Perhaps she had a schedule Monday with one, Tuesday with another. It was astonishing and frankly quite alarming. Given the scandalous nature of her activities, I saw an opportunity to resolve the financial burden she had placed on me. I confronted her. Could you return the $160,000 to prevent this scandal from breaking out? I know about everything. Terrified of the repercussions, she quickly agreed. I'll pay. Please don't tell anyone. I beg you, forgive me. All right, I responded. I expect the $160,000 by next Friday. You can make several transfers if that's easier. She promised to comply, and indeed, she returned the full amount in installments over the next few days. With a deep sense of satisfaction, I returned home, but I wasn't quite done yet. Despite my mother-in-law's belief that I would keep the secret, I decided to expose her deeds for the deceit they were. I sent photos to the wives of the men involved, showing them with my mother-in-law. Soon, her misdeeds were the talk of the neighborhood. When she confronted me, outraged by the breach of trust, she exclaimed, "How could you expose me like that? You said you wouldn't say anything." I didn't say anything, I countered calmly. I sent letters. Since I didn't speak directly to anyone, it's still within the bounds of our agreement, right? She was distraught. You deceived me. Now everyone is calling me a dirty old woman. What are you going to do about it? I'm being sued for damages. It's hell, I replied somewhat coldly. Well, perhaps you can manage the payments from your pension, your daughter's part-time income, and your son's salary. Let's all work hard together to pay it off. I'll be cheering for you. She felt mocked and lamented her bleak future. In response, I pointed out, well, considering you were already sinking in debt, it seems like you didn't have much of a future to begin with. Whatever happens now is just a new chapter in your life. Eventually, the lawsuits forced her to compensate the aggrieved wives, and she couldn't handle it alone. Her family had to contribute, which led them into poverty. They were even ostracized and driven out by their own relatives, disappearing from the neighborhood. As for me, I continued my work from home, now delving into web developer. It was a shift from my previous job, but I found peace in the quiet hours of the night. The relief of no longer having to deal with the toxic environment at my in-laws' house brought immense happiness. Moving forward, I plan to save money for my own future and for my daughter's eventual wedding, cherishing the freedom and tranquility of my new life.